Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to SMIE Consulting's Midweek Roundup for today, July 18th, 2018. It's my pleasure to be with you for the second installment of what will be a weekly feature on our SMIE Consulting homepage on Facebook, and looking forward to chatting with you today on three key topics that have grabbed the attention of the news in the last week or so. Two of those are recent stories on topics related to visa applicants from abroad. The next is related to a new university list that has come out in the last couple of months that has received some attention, and want to highlight that for you today. So today what we're going to cover are the new SEVIS fees for FM and J visa applicants. That information was just released in the last couple of days. As per usual with any changes to government regulations, there is a comment period before the ruling takes effect, and unlikely that there's going to be any changes to it. But we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the International ACAC survey that was released last week, a May survey done of colleges and universities and counselors on what some of the top issues for international students that are considering coming to the United States and what might be preventing them from considering the United States as an option, or things that they're most concerned about. So we'll talk about that from a university and counselor perspective. And then we'll talk about the U.S. News and World Report Top Universities for International Students list. And this is, by all accounts, the first time U.S. News has produced a list instead of a ranking. For those familiar with U.S. News and World Report, their rankings are been around for decades in the United States and receive a lot of fanfare each year when they're released for their university rankings in the U.S. Internationally is a different story, and we'll talk a little bit more today about what international students' views of rankings are and have been, and how this list is different and actually caters to information that's relevant for international audiences. So we'll talk about that. Let's kick it off first with the news of the last couple of days related to proposed SEVIS fees. There are going to be increases to those fees that will be taking place in the next few days, and I'll be placing links to these stories in the comments section here on the SMIE Consulting Facebook page. So please feel free to check into these as we go along if you have questions. What we'll be doing with these stories each week is kind of touching on a lot of the kinds of issues that will affect international educators in their day-to-day work, but also things that have perhaps a little bit more longer-term value or importance as we go through what we do each day in international education. So glad you could join me today. What these SEVIS fees are, for those who haven't seen the story yet, there was a report on it in Inside Higher Ed yesterday. That Department of Homeland Security is going to be increasing the mandatory SEVIS fees paid by applicants for F and M visas. The most common, F certainly the most common for international students coming to the U.S., from its existing $200 to $350. And again, these are one-time fees related to the initial I-20s that students receive and apply for student visas at U.S. consulates and embassies abroad. So this increase, it's a 75% increase in the fees from $200 to $350, an extra $150 for students from overseas applying to the United States for visas. So that's obviously a substantial increase and imposes an additional cost on international students that are already paying a lot of fees here for tests, test prep, for vaccines, for a number of different issues. And kudos to Andrew Moe for posting yesterday or this morning about that, and encouraging institutions to really look at ways that they can help, particularly the cash-strapped international students that are applying to their institutions, to potentially have waivers or mechanisms in place to pay perhaps some of the additional fees that are going to be levied. Now, the rationale whenever these kinds of fee increases occur is, okay, what's really the motivation here? Well, for those who aren't familiar with particularly the overseas audiences, why the SEVIS fee exists, this was implemented shortly after SEVIS was introduced as the existing database from which all international students' documents are created related to I-20s, DS-2019s that are used for securing visas initially, but also are part of the evidence of student status while they're in the United States. Much of what students experience throughout their time in the United States is related to SEVIS and updates that must be done related to addresses, major changes, level changes, practical training endorsements, those types of things, travel endorsements. All of that is done through the SEVIS system. This database, when it was created, congressionally mandated that it would be funded on a cost recovery basis through the fees that are charged to students on the front end for the visas that they apply for. Before they can apply for the visas, they need to pay their SEVIS fees. That's one of the requirements for students who are going to U.S. consulates and embassies to pay that visa fee. And the other piece of the puzzle that in terms of funding is the fees that are charged to universities and colleges to have a certification to issue and legal ability to issue the documents through the SEVIS system. So there are also going to be increases to those fees for U.S. institutions. So not a huge deal on that front, still comparative to the damage that could be done related to international students. And the extra costs that this new change imposes on them. Since it's a cost recovery piece, those that have been following news have seen a lot of pieces on the role of ICE, the division of the Department of Homeland Security responsible for enforcement of immigration and customs regulations and laws. So there has been, certainly since SEVIS was introduced, there had been a whole range of staff that were hired through ICE to do monitoring of institutions and meet regularly with U.S. colleges and universities that had ability to issue documents through SEVIS. That staff has increased. ICE staff in general has increased, and because ICE is funded in part, the unit of ICE that deals with students is funded in part, is funded entirely, I should say, by the SEVIS fee. The increase, obviously, that ICE has experienced in staffing for monitoring students and others has also led to this need for an increase in the SEVIS fees. And that, the cynic in me would say that, well, you're driving up your own costs internally by hiring all these extra staff to monitor students and universities, but the knock-on effect of the increase in this fee is going to potentially lead to a decrease in students' ability to come and pay for this fee, and again, interest in coming to the United States, potentially yet another roadblock or hurdle that students must overcome at least before they can come to the United States. So certainly something to think about in terms of how your institution might be responding to this new SEVIS fee news and how you're communicating that. Obviously, the fees won't go into effect before the fall intakes that will affect the greater majority of U.S. institutions that are going to be bringing in international students in the next few weeks. But you certainly want to be aware of this potentially for January intakes, or certainly next summer and fall intakes, where this new fee will likely be in place. Start having the discussions on your campus now if there's going to be any mechanisms that you can implement to help offset this cost for students, or potentially pay that SEVIS fee for students that are intending to come to your institution. Again, this fee is something that they have to pay before they can apply for their student visa interview. They need to have a SEVIS fee receipt when they go for that visa interview. So that is an important piece of the puzzle. So hopefully your institutions are getting prepared for this, certainly commenting, participating in the public comment period, indicating your displeasure with these new fees. Certainly can't hurt, but unlikely that it's going to register any change in policy on the institution, on the university, on the administration's end. So certainly one thing that has just come on the radar in the last few weeks, and that those fee increases. Another that you'll want to keep in the back of your mind, and you're probably already thinking about it, particularly if you were at the International ACAC conference last week in New Orleans. You probably at least saw the session that referenced these survey results that came out. There were some stories in the news, not a lot, and usually it was, I think the majority of the press that I saw was local from New Orleans sources on the International ACAC conference, and that's unfortunate because it is a substantial conference of international admissions folks, as well as college guidance counselors and international schools abroad, and really has an impact, I think, on and a great professional development, great social conferences as well. But importantly, it doesn't get a whole lot of play in the media, which is unfortunate. I wish it would get more. At the conference, a survey was released that surveyed 73 college campuses across the United States. This was in May, to look at how different factors were impacting international students on enrollment numbers at their institutions. The results of the survey looked at factors such as safety on and off campus, immigration policies, and the ability to find postgraduate graduation employment. How those things were impacting international enrollments, specifically at U.S. institutions. Of those that were surveyed, about 57% reported a decrease in the number of applications of students applying to schools in the United States. This was, I think, from the counselor side that were surveyed in this international ACAC piece. That decrease was particularly noticeable, apparently, in Africa and the Middle East, which is a little bit interesting for Africa, not so much for the Middle East, where there seemed to be, from counselors in that region, a 78% decrease in applications to the United States over the past year, as well as in South and Central America, where there was a reported 75% decrease during the 2017-2018 school year. So that's in this last academic year. Over 75% drop in applications from these international school counselors in the Middle East and South and Central America, and Africa as well. So that's of particular concern, and that's that significant a drop in interest in U.S. colleges and universities at the undergraduate level, certainly. That has implications down the road, potentially for graduate students as well. So again, the international school community is a microcosm of the world. That in terms of the nationalities that exist, is not typically just for nationals from that country that are going to those international schools. These tend to be very diverse schools that are looking at options not just in the United States, but Canada, Australia, UK, other countries as well. So this is an indication, perhaps, of that the continued impact of policies of the government, as well as existing other changes that are going on, or certainly changing attitudes in terms of where students, particularly high school students, are considering their options for university study. So applications also from the survey seem to be, for European students, were down about 59%. Chinese student applications 53% down during the last school year as well. Parents and students, when surveyed, were asked as part of this survey what were the main concerns. We talked about safety on and off campus, but also gun violence and immigration policies, and finding employment after graduation. So that survey is troubling when you consider everything that institutions have been doing, certainly, to address these issues. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what the impact is of these continuous changes going on to immigration policy and the rhetoric involved. there's a one school of thought that says that, which I'm actually fairly committed to myself, in that a lot of the downturn that U.S. institutions are experiencing on a macro scale were already in place and happening for the last 2 to 3 years, that are outside of all the political debates related to immigration that's taken place, and certainly the current administration's take on that. I think things such as the Saudi scholarship program, the devolution of the Brazilian scientific mobility program, these are two massive scholarship programs that had benefited a number of U.S. colleges and universities, a fairly large number of U.S. colleges and universities over the past few years. And those being wrapped up or downsized or ended have impacted greatly, not just colleges and universities at the undergraduate and graduate level, but also English language programs that were heavily dependent on students from those two countries that made up a lot of their classes each year for a good 4 or 5, 6 years or longer. So those building blocks were already in place. We had already seen through Open Doors numbers for a number of years things like with Japan's continued decreases in their college age graduating populations each year. In South Korea, a fairly steady decline as well, still maintaining on to third place. And then those kind of decreases are certainly were already in the process before all of the current administration's political rhetoric kind of came to the fore in late 2016 and beyond. So I think that's certainly one school of thought that has accelerated some of the, I think, one school of thought that certainly has contributed to the downturns and is the main driving force, I think, for the downturns that institutions are experiencing, particularly those that have become very dependent on sets of students from these two countries and perhaps others that have experienced significant downturns. So the other school of thought is that it's all down to Trump and that all of the political rhetoric and his America First attitudes have been really driving a lot of the downturns that that institutions are now facing in terms of attitudinal differences from the students, as reflected by this international ACAC survey result, but also other surveys around the world through other sources that have, through hot courses, through others that have shown a decrease in interest, perhaps level of interest in the United States as a study destination. But again, that's the second school of thought. My guess is, and the common ground I think is that it is a combination of the two kind of ongoing trends that were already happening in international education in terms of where the global market was shifting, but also the impact of political forces in the United States on overall attitudes outside. And that's not the first time it's happened. We saw this post 9/11, but it's definitely, as a lot of my colleagues will comment, it's certainly a different level of kind of negativity that is felt, I think, around the world perhaps than we have had previously. Are there still markets out there that are going to be good markets for institutions in the United States? Absolutely, and I think that's going to be part of the ongoing challenges, identifying where those markets are for your institutions and where you can best leverage your institutional assets to reach those students and get your foothold in. Certainly going to have to work a lot harder than you have, and the more with less is probably the most common phrase institution colleagues are hearing around the world, particularly around the United States in these days. So best of luck to my colleagues who are dealing with those kind of issues. One bit of a bright spot that again is coming external of all the political pieces that are going on is something that I had a chance to be a part of in May leading up to the NAFSA conference. And that's something that came out right at the end of the month. It was a new list that was created. For those familiar with U.S. News and World Report, They do a series of rankings on U.S. institutions in different programs in different regions of the United States. They have national university lists. They have all sorts of various lists that they send, rankings that they produce each year. The one challenge with those lists, those rankings that have been produced, is the criteria that are used to determine where a particular institution fits in a ranking category really has very little influence or relevance for an international student who's looking to find an institution that's a good fit for them. And that's what we always preach to prospective students, certainly on the domestic side and international even more so, is explaining what fit is. But the idea that there is potentially more than one college that is right for every student that's looking. And the challenge is to be able to sort through the huge morass of institutions and types of institutions that are out there. And that's something that I think there isn't something right now. Education USA certainly does a great job of breaking it down and helping walk the students through that process. And your 5 steps to U.S. study that was released in 2010 has become really, I think, a gold standard for college advising for international students. And that's something that's great in terms of helping students kind of identify what they need to be asking themselves and asking colleges and universities. But I think what's missing from that is kind of a look outside of the advising process, something that parents, students can look to help make sense of the whole process. So U.S. News and World Report, that we're all familiar with that. You may also be familiar with a newer organization called U.S. News Global Education, and that was formed in late 2016, I think, as a partnership or 2017, as a partnership between Shoreline Education, one of the larger pathway providers in the United States, and U.S. News World Report, education section in particular. So those two companies created U.S. News Global Education to serve as a resource for students and parents overseas that are looking to send their sons or daughters to the United States. They have a series now of blogs and articles that go out to student and parent audiences overseas, explaining a lot of the how to and what fors of the U.S. higher ed system. And they also have a network of advisors and agents overseas that are being trained on the various ins and outs of the process to get certified by U.S. News Global Education. So part of that partnership between U.S. News World Report and Shoreline through U.S. News Global Education was this new list that came out, and the link to it at U.S. News World Report, usnews.com, is for they had a blog at the end of May 30th was their blog, and that's the link that's in the comments section of the Facebook page here. That has, it's called Top Universities for International Students. And again, it's an alphabetical list. What this list involves is, it's actually the what they're calling their top university list for international students. It has it takes of the many lists that U.S. News and World Report has and produces each year. This takes the national universities list. That's a list of approximately 300 universities, and that list, they had a series of criteria, questions that they've been asking U.S. institutions as part of their institutional surveys every year for a number of years. And what it did is it had things like graduation rates for international students, retention rates for international students, do you have scholarships for international students, do you have orientation, ESL programs, other kind of building blocks of what makes a successful international student services office and campus environment for international students, asking institutions those questions. They've been asking those questions for years, but never doing anything with that data, according to the U.S. News and World Report team. And what's one of the reasons for this list, the top universities, and again, stressing it is a list, not a rankings, the starting point is these 300 national universities. I had as part of the release of this list during NAFSA week, there was also U.S. News Global Education commissioned a white paper, which I had the fortune of writing for U.S. News Global Education, that kind of addressed the details of this list and the kind of the metrics that were used and why these things are important for international audiences. So for many of you, that may help reinforce a lot of your existing ideas of international education in the United States. So I certainly would encourage you, if you haven't read it already, the link to it's now in the comments section. Certainly you can get that PDF, download it, and take a read on kind of the methodology behind the top universities list that was created. Great thing about this list that I love, and I'll kind of close with this comments about this, is that list of when they applied the criteria to I think 15 or 16 criteria that U.S. News World Report used to come up with the list. To this 300, they applied the criteria to the 300 universities that are considered the top national universities. The results revealed that only 180 of that 300 actually made the list in terms of having a positive score on this top university list. So I think it's, from my perspective, I see this as sort of a wake-up call. Wake-up call to universities that have existed on their name internationally for far too long without really investing in the infrastructure needed to sustain international students and treat them well while they're on campus, and create the environment for them that is truly welcoming, that does provide the safety net for them, that does help build the bridges for those international students with the campus community and with the surrounding community, and provides an environment that makes them feel that they're a part of the university. So I think that list of 120 of those top national universities are not on this list. There are a number of reasons why they wouldn't be on this list. Obviously, if they responded to the survey and didn't answer those questions, then they wouldn't be on the list. So that's maybe a reason. But I, in fact, was contacted by one of the schools that was on the list, or that was not on the list, asking, "Hey, why aren't we on the list?" And I share with them what I'm sharing with you now. It's making sure that whoever's filling out that survey has the relevant information about your institution, so that that prospective students, when they see this list, can then make an informed decision as to whether or not you are truly an international student-friendly campus. And I think it's the first time we have now a U.S. source tool that can help. Again, right now it's just those top 300 national universities. So it's a tool that can be used by students and parents abroad and counselors to evaluate U.S. institutions with a bit more of a focused lens on those issues that were going to be relevant to them in their educational journey in the United States. So definitely encourage you to check out that list, see if you are a national university from the U.S. News World Report side, to find out if your school is on that list. The list is an alphabetical list, so it's not a ranking within that list. So it's just an alphabetical list of those top 300 national universities. In talking with the U.S. News folks, they seemed eager to want to replicate or apply these same criteria, these international student-friendly criteria, to their other lists that they have, the regional universities lists, the national liberal arts colleges, the regional liberal arts colleges, and so on. I think if they get to that point where they are willing to commit the resources to do that, I think that will have added value for you as international educators on the U.S. side, certainly to help better present your university and see how and be able to tout a list that your institution is on that is actually relevant for the audiences that you're trying to bring in from overseas. So I think this U.S. News World Report top universities list for international students is going to hopefully be the start of something a lot bigger in terms of where U.S. institutions can move in terms of their focus to things that are truly of benefit for international students. And that means putting your money where your mouth is as an institution and investing in the services and staff that are required to help cater to the needs of your international audiences. If that's something your institution still values, hopefully they do. And I wish you all the best in making sure you get to that point. So that's all I have for now. Tune in next week where we'll do a similar session on issues that may be coming up between now and then. And if you didn't catch the whole recording, a whole live session today, we'll rebroadcast or repost this on the Facebook page shortly. So thanks again for your time and wish you all the best of luck. Bye-bye.